Listen, if you're watching this, you're probably a car enthusiast. And the thing is, I've loved cars for as long as I can remember. And I mean, right now I'm in my early 20s and I can't see that changing anytime soon. I'm always going to love cars. You know, I'm always going to go to car shows. I'm always going to be looking at my next car on Facebook Marketplace or Auto Trader. But recently I've been thinking of where it all began. You know, how did I get to this moment? And how will it evolve? Because I've definitely noticed different trends over the lifespan of me being a car enthusiast. I think for most, well, definitely for me, it all started off with going to my first car show. In my opinion, this is like the make or break, you know. It's usually why a lot of car guys, you know, their dad will be, or their uncle will be into cars and they'll take them to their first car show. But I can remember that being my clear, very first moment. And I remember specifically being driven towards the 944 and a Corvette C3 for some reason, which is really interesting because my taste in cars now is very Japanese. But I do think it is about that introduction. You know, you go along to a car show and you're just completely blown away because you're seeing these unusual, cool cars. You're not used to it. You know, you're used to just seeing your everyday cars on the road. And this usually happens, you know, when you're quite young, when you're around 6, 7, 8, maybe 10. But I think shortly after that comes what I call is the media phase. And I'm talking about video games, you know, Midnight Club, Need for Speed Underground, Forza Horizon, which is a little bit more for my generation. I was kind of in the awkward stage between Need for Speed Underground and Forza Horizon. I was like, the first Forza Horizon was sort of where I was at. I just want to say, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can always unsubscribe at any time. Anyway, back to the video. But I remember playing Underground 2 a bunch on my brother's PlayStation 2. And films. Yes, Fast and Furious is probably the biggest. But even for older generations, I remember my dad talking about the film Bullet with Steve McQueen in it. And it sounds funny, but even the film Cars, you know, the Pixar film, I don't know why, but that film had so much influence on me. And of course, how can I forget Top Gear? Definitely, you know, by far my favourite show ever to exist. I still watch it with my dad after he comes home from work. And no, I'm not talking about the new Top Gear, I'm talking about the original with the original trio. That show was so good, especially the specials. I loved the specials. My favourite by far was the Africa special when they was trying to find the source of the Nile with the, I think it was a Subaru, BMW and Volvo. But even when they made the Grand Tour, it still wasn't as good as the original Top Gear. I don't know what it was, but when they were cooking up something there. I think Top Gear was so good in particular because it showed how much fun you could have with cheaper cars. But anyway, we do finally get to the stage where you end up buying your first car. You know, you become old enough to start learning how to drive. And before you buy your first car, you know, you try and look to get an enthusiast car for your first car. You know, you'll try and look for cheap insurance. You'll search far and wide. And the thing is, usually because your parents won't let you, but it just isn't really a thing. It's quite hard to do. So you end up getting your first car, which mine was a Civic, which I think a Honda Civic is like it's the typical first car for a car enthusiast. And I'm not gonna lie, this car was absolutely fantastic. It was a 2003 Honda Civic. I think it was a 3-door. It was brilliant. It was actually quite a fun car to drive. It never let me down. But I think even though this is when you have your slowest car, it's when you do the most dumb stuff with a car. I actually was quite boring and sensible with my first car, but I know a lot of my friends did some pretty dumb stuff with their first cars. You know, they would put sort of the McDonald's trays under the rear wheels and drift it round, or, you know, around a car park or something. Or the amount of just handbrake turns they would do in it. Like, we'd do some pretty stupid stuff. But having your first car is all about having fun, and you learn a lot of what, you know, car ownership's all about. You're probably going to do some pretty awful mods, you know. You're probably going to do some interesting modifications to it. Things will go wrong, and this is probably, I mean, your first car, in all fairness, is probably going to be your most reliable car if you're a car enthusiast. Like, my Honda Civic never went wrong, but you know, you'll still learn to do a few things here and there to it, and there will probably be some bad times. You know, you'll have your first MOT failure, or, you know, you'll learn how expensive insurance can be. And this car, you know, you'll probably get a few scrapes on it. You'll probably, you know, the wheels might be a bit messed up by the end of owning it, but the fact is, it's your first car and you've learnt the most from it. Thank God I never really modified my Civic. It had an aftermarket shift knob and a Type R badge, which is so right. That's actually awful now I think back on it. But other than that, I kept it pretty stock, which is good. But I do think, you know, the first car is one of the most important cars you'll ever own. And you will always love your first car. It will always be something you'll look back on and smile. So if you are at this stage, really enjoy it because, you know, it is quite fun. And I mean, I was one of the first people to drive in my friend group. So I was driving all my friends about in my car. It was good times. It was really good times. Then I think this next stage is when you really truly start to become a car enthusiast. I'm not saying that you're not a car enthusiast if you don't go through this, but this is where where you really learn about the community and what it's like to actually be a car enthusiast, and how much money and time it costs. And that is when you buy your first project car / enthusiast car, just first car that you actually want. You've had enough of your first car, you've outgrown it, you've got enough money for the next car. And I'm not gonna lie, this is the most exciting thing, buying that car. I mean, when I bought my MX-5, I was so I was so excited. It was literally the first one I went to view, but all of the, all the rust had been treated, and it's a really clean example. And man, I remember coming home with it and being so happy. Definitely one of the best days of my life, because it was one of my dream cars growing up. And yeah, finally getting to own something that you actually really want is really exciting. Don't get me wrong though, this is definitely the hardest period of being a car enthusiast, because you will now start to spend a lot more money than you initially planned. Not just through repairs, but also through modification. First of all, usually, especially if you're into older cars and it's more of a project, expect to spend money. This is the phase where you start to dump a lot of money and time into it. Things will go wrong. On the enthusiast cars, usually they're driven quite hard, especially if it's more of a sports car. Things will probably go wrong. It's probably quite high mileage. It's old, most likely as well. And yeah, things are likely going to go wrong, and it is going to cost a little bit of money and time to repair it. Saying that though, this is where you learn and you really start to see if you are a car enthusiast, because if you enjoy the process, then it's a good thing, it's positive. But if you hate having to repair your car into late hours of the night, or you don't enjoy that process of finding parts and that kind of thing, which, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be fun all the time, but if you really start to resent it, maybe it's not cut out for you. You can still be a car enthusiast, but these project cars really put you through it. One of my friends has an RX-8, and he really does, he really goes through it with that thing. He's owned it for 4 months, right? And it's his first enthusiast car, and it's broke down twice already. But as much as this is annoying for him, he also loves the process of learning about rotaries and stuff, because his dream car is an RX-7. So, he really wants to learn, about it, and he enjoys the process of it. And I'm not gonna lie, there's been times where with my car things have gone wrong, or it's not really gone to plan, and I've had to spend a little bit more money on it, and I've kind of wanted to buy something newer that's more reliable, more refined. And that doesn't make me any less of a car enthusiast, but actually enjoying the process of fixing it and finding parts and modifying it. I think there's something about that. I mean, today I literally spent over 500 quid on suspension and aero for my car, which I'll probably make a video about on this channel, but I don't think any normal sane person would do that. But if you enjoy spending money and working on it, then you are a proper car enthusiast, there's no doubt about that. Especially for those guys who buy proper classic cars and really work on them, and they learn to weld and all that kind of stuff. Like, they are super dedicated, and you have to hand it to them. It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of enthusiasm, because at the end of the day, an enthusiast is someone who's enthusiastic about something, and enjoying the good and bad times is all part of that. After you experience all of this, so you probably go into the reality check phase. You've had your fun, you've had the modifying madness phase, and the project car phase, and it's more of a you have that reality check now. You know what it's about, you've kind of mastered it, and you might be able to take on another project, or you probably have a daily as well. And I've not quite got there yet, because I've only got my MX-5, and there's still loads of stuff I have to learn. But I know from speaking to older car enthusiasts, they usually have a daily, and they're a lot more calculated about what projects they take on, mainly because they put more responsibility and just more money in general. And there'll probably be stages in life where you don't have an enthusiast car, or you don't have a project car, whether it's if you decide to have a family or whatnot. But whatever stage of car enthusiast you're at, if you can't even drive yet, or if you're in your 80s and you have a project car in your garage, just enjoy being a car enthusiast, enjoy the process, because who knows, the next generation may only be able to drive electric cars, which sounds like hell, but it may be the case. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, I thought it was a little bit something different, please feel free to subscribe. It's free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. And yeah, I will make sure to see you in the next one. Ciao for now.